Good afternoon to everyone present here. I cordially welcome you all to Tech Bharat 2021, Empowering EduTech and Health Tech. Tech Bharat is an initiative of Laghu Udyog Bharati and IMS Foundation. Tech Bharat is envisioned as a platform to support startups and SMEs and be a guiding light to them in their entrepreneurial journey. We are lucky to have found support from the Government of India at various stages, and we thank the ministers, officials, and representatives of Department of Education, Department of Health and Family Welfare, Department of Science and Technology, AICTE, and CSIR in encouraging us and supporting our vision. We welcome you to this session on healthcare, innovation, research, and regulatory compliance. Making healthcare innovative in its affordability and accessibility is the biggest challenge the world continues to face. Further, through social entrepreneurship, access and traction to healthcare insurance, financing of healthcare services, building healthcare repositories, and adoption of innovative business models to tackle healthcare needs is essential. To discuss this further, we have eminent panelists with us today. First, I would like to introduce Mr. Shiva P. Hiraman, who would be moderating the session today. Mr. Shiva is the CEO and founder director of Santa Monod Pharmaceuticals Private Limited. He envisioned and started the company in India after strategically collaborating with the Merck Group company. He has pioneered in aesthetic dermatology products for India. He earlier served as executive director for Pharmalead, Dubai, and launched pharmaceutical generics in Middle East and Africa. He was the head of region for GCC and Middle East for Dr. Reddy's Laboratories Private Limited, and has diverse experience in the oil-rich Middle East and North Africa region, where he launched the company and the products, set up the distribution and channel partner networks in all the member countries. A heartfelt thanks to you, Mr. Shiva, for accepting to moderate this session, and we welcome you to Tech Bharat.
Thank you so much, Vishu.
We have Dr. Sudhindra Kaushik, Chief Innovator and Co-founder Prasu. He has been a practicing innovator throughout his career of 24 years with more than 18 national and international patents in various stages. We are excited to have you here, sir, and we welcome you. We have Professor Emeritus Dr. Amina Aether, CEO AHN Germany, with us today. She's an expert in health education with over 17 years working with the personalized and preventive healthcare on non-invasive and non-drug therapy. We thank you for accepting our invitation and welcome you, Professor. We have Dr. Abhishek Appaji, Institutional Coordinator for R&D and Assistant Professor at BMS College of Engineering. Currently, he is the Joint Treasurer and Site Chair of the IEEE Bangalore section from 2019. We welcome you to the session, sir, and we are excited to have you here.
Thank you.
I now request Mr. Shiva P. Hiraman to take over the session and moderate it. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Vishu. Now, at this stage, since the introductions have been done briefly, I'd also want to take the panelists into confidence to make a slightly more in-depth introduction of the panelists. That would be probably in the interest of everyone who is going to be listening to us. Now, firstly, I take this the panelist, Professor Emeritus Dr. Amina Aether. Professor Dr. Amina Aether is an expert in health education for the last 17 years, working with personalized and preventive healthcare and non-invasive and non-drug therapy across 21 countries. She holds a PhD in public health with a focus of health education of women through green pharmacy. She has won many awards and appreciations from around the world, such as Golden Hibiscus from Malaysia, Dream Angel from Sudan, and Young Entrepreneur from the Ford Foundation, and many more. Welcome to you, Dr. Amin. Now we have another very eminent panelist, Dr. Sudhindra Kaushik, who is the Chief Innovator and Co-founder of Prasu. Dr. Kaushik has been a practicing innovator throughout his career of 24 years with more than 18 national and international patents in various stages. Dr. Kaushik is passionate about innovation and has served in Philips Global Development Center, Singapore, Philips Advanced System Laboratory and Philips Innovation Center in Eindhoven in the Netherlands and Philips Innovation Center in India. He has worked in HCL as Practice Director Innovation India and was the Vice President and Head Innovation at TTK Prestige. Dr. Kaushik has published several research papers and has conducted numerous workshops on innovation in India and abroad. He is the recipient of Karnataka State Innovation Council Award, HCL Excellence Award for Patents, India Design Mark Award from India Design Council, and the Sir M. Vishwesharaya Engineer Award. He is also the cartoonist, interestingly an actor, among many other very interesting things. Now we have Dr. Abhishek Appaji. He is the current chair of IEEE Bangalore. Dr. Appaji is the institutional coordinator for R&D and is the assistant professor at BMS College of Engineering. He is also serving as a guest faculty at Maastricht University, the Netherlands. He is a graduate of MIT Global Entrepreneurship Bootcamp specialized in new venture. Dr. Appaji was the chair of IEEE Young Professionals Bangalore section during 2017 and 2018. Currently, Dr. Appaji is the joint treasurer and site chair of IEEE Bangalore section from 2019, treasurer of IEEE STEMS Bangalore chapter, and YP lead of India Webmaster. So welcome all the panelists. With your permission, I would want to open up for the panel discussion. Now, this session would be a very interesting session, which would probably go through the various innovations and making the healthcare affordable and accessible, not only for India, but across the globe. I would invite Dr. Kaushik to go with the opening remarks. Dr. Kaushik, please.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Shiva. It's a pleasure to be speaking with such a wonderful and accomplished people in the field of healthcare. So, like I was introduced, I'm basically coming from the space of innovation, which is quite domain agnostic. So, work with different domains, finance, healthcare, consumer, and automotive, and so on. I think when you look at healthcare today, it is not the same healthcare that we used to have when we were growing up. There is a paradigm shift in what healthcare means. And that what does it mean? It has different elements, right? From it's just not medicine. That's the way we used to be seeing it as when we were growing up in India, for example. When I lived in Europe, there was a first kind of a approach how innovation was also in how it was in treatment, not just in medicine. So there are multiple parts in the system that have grown as an adult from where it was in infancy stage few years ago. So that includes medicine, point of care, the way of delivery, the care provider, and there is also a kind of overarching policy regulator and benefactors, you might say. And of course, the pharmacy as an industry, as a pharmaceutical industry, perhaps has been put under more pressure, but it is not significantly doing very different things than it used to do before. I'll touch upon some of those things later when I talk about their aspects. But the whole idea is the shift has been from the way you are consuming healthcare, like you were consuming food in the past, has also gone into a very big change. What do I mean by that? I mean, it has more become, the healthcare industry has more become a kind of a factory where you get into the system, you get out of the system. You get into a healthcare provider, get out of the healthcare provider. So there is more automation going on. There's a lot of innovation also. So if you look at a typical day in in an Indian city. Many years ago, it used to be the boon of having multiple pathology labs coming in where innovation has happened. So they enable a lot of people to get tests done more as a preemptive measure than as a remedial, a therapy. So I think that's the first paradigm shift that I have noticed. But also there in this particular case, there has been some innovation. So instead of the person going to the lab to get a urine test or a blood test done, the lab comes to the home. So most of us take it for granted, but it is a very unique thing that has happened in India, which I don't see in many parts of the world where I travel to. If you have a blood test, if you have a urine test, the sample is taken from home. If you imagine such a boom and in the pathology lab world while maintaining standards, it's a very big value addition for both. The same pathology lab can now serve more patients because the more patients they entertain inside their lab, it is difficult to handle beyond a certain number. And given COVID, it's even something that people don't want to do, right? So these kind of innovations have come in every stage, whether it's clinical trials, which I'm sure Dr. Amina will touch about. There is the way of delivery, the way, the standardized procedures. And recently, a friend of mine also talked about how in the SARS COVID times, but also now specifically with COVID becoming rampant, there was an AI-based diagnostic to look at the lungs image, which you wouldn't see in a normal X-ray, and then detect COVID. So I think this, all in all, there is every element of the value chain of healthcare has come to a stage where it can thrive and grow further. So I think there is a lot of innovation possible in every step. At the same time, regulation and accountability will have to be in balance to make these innovations useful, basically to normal people. Back to you, Mr. Shiva.
I think that was a brief one. However, other panelists would also take it forward where we left from. I welcome Dr. Amin to talk about what is very close to our heart.
Yeah, thank you so much for connecting me back to India with such a topic, innovation, research, and regulatory compliance. I was just before the session starting, I was saying that right from the high school itself, we have to put the innovation breed in the young minds. And now during pandemic, when I did an observation study, a human clinical trial, sitting in Germany and handling at a makeshift hospital in Bangalore, I said, I have to write a book on big data management. Taking an informed consent itself was an innovation. Informed consent, you were giving a paper and getting it signed, but you are supposed to talk to them on a WhatsApp audio call, video call, or a Zoom call, and convincing them, taking the information, getting the consent signed. So the informed consent for a clinical trial itself changed because you're not touching the person, you're not seeing the person, you are now completely doing a recording. Now the guideline for the informed consent during pandemic will become an audio video call recorded in their own language at their own time. This line completely changes. This is an innovation again. And this becomes an innovation of the person who tried to do that. There have been thousands of clinical trials going on. That's why I suggested that we have a clinical trial thing. My whole suggestion was to bridge the gap between the technology and the healthcare assistant. We have enough, we have artificial intelligence, we have screening, we have digitalizations, we have mobile phones, we have so many things, but we need to bridge the clinical implications and the technology together. So that's where is an innovation. The innovation is bringing both of them together. You cannot find a doctor and an engineer in the same person. Maybe a doctor can be, because he liked electronics or she liked electronics or something, there may be a little bit of innovation. For example, the injection syringes, you need to discard it. So they innovate something. So we need to bring a portal where we have everybody around us to do the innovation. And the most important is the intellectual property rights of the innovator. Even Dr. Kaushik was saying, innovation of the treatments is also an intellectual property right. This is where I would like to focus on the regulatory compliance. When you are taking a certification of a device, why not we take a certification for an innovation during the treatment, right? Combination of the drugs, combination of the diet and the drugs, combination of the person in the vicinity. So probably I would like a few points on this in the further coming sessions or what and how it is, and we start discussing. So thank you for this, and I was sharing my thoughts also to start a virtual university where we have continued medical education programs for the healthcare assistants, and their resource persons should be the technologists. So this is where we are planning in further, where we want to combine the whole sector from the European and the Indian sector. And this is where I would be very happy to collaborate with all of you, because we need hand in hand. Whatever somebody is innovating an ECG machine, and you ask somebody, it's like somebody is cooking dosa and you are cooking palya somewhere, chutney somewhere, and you don't know how to eat. You can see people eating dosa with a fork and spoon, but eating dosa with a hand is different, exactly different. Eating idli with the hand is totally different than with the fork and the spoon. But we need to put this technology together. So probably that would be my concern about it. Thank you so much, Dr. Shiva and Dr. Kaushik and Dr. Appaji there. So yes, we have a good panel discussion, and the time is really constrained, and yeah, we can concise it to the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Amin. Now I request Dr. Abhishek, the academician, probably to come up with his views on the innovation and how the academia and the industry can come together. Probably.
Yeah. So thank you for inviting me to Tech Bharat 2020 and 2021. So it's really exciting to be here along with other co-panelists. We are discussing about innovation, research, and regulatory compliance. So let's take word by word little bit and expand according to me what is that I do practice and what is that we should practice. So innovation, I'll give you an example. I handle a class which is on innovation for entrepreneurship and medical device development. So this course on medical device development, we have innovation. So we start with innovation. We send our students to go into the hospital as clinical immersion. They do identify what kind of problem are doctors facing. So I'll just give you an example. So if you go and ask a doctor, hey doctor, what is the problem you're facing? So doctor will come up like a very valid problem. He says that whenever I want to reach my OPD, I'll be little late, so I don't get car parking. So that's the problem he'll come up with. But that's not the way why we biomedical engineers are there to solve. So car parking, yes, it's a problem in cities like Bangalore, Delhi, Mumbai, and all. But it's not the problem of a biomedical engineer to be solved. So we curate them, we help them to identify unmet need by something known as shadowing the doctor. That's all from Stanford Biodesign program. So they just shadow the doctor and come up with some multiple problems and then filter out and try to solve one or two problems during their semester or as their final year project. So this way, there is some kind of innovation we are getting in engineering education where I teach. But as Dr. Ether said, it's really important that we should start inculcating or practicing innovation right from their childhood. So coming to research is something because I'm heading R&D at BMS College of Engineering. So research is something very close to my heart, and especially biomedical research. I have various funds on different projects. So here again, all my projects have been in collaboration with one of the clinician or a doctor. So without them, because they are the final end users or they are the customers who will actually use my research, whatever I've developed. It's very important that both innovation and research should happen as a team rather than in silos. Why is that? Because if I'm developing some solution and there is no user, then there is no use of any solution which I'm developing. Or a doctor has a lot of problem he just has with himself or herself and not ready to share with others, then it cannot be solved if they're not ready to share with engineers. So as other two panelists spoke, we need a forum or we need a place where all doctors, engineers, regulatory compliance experts, the experts in management and experts in business, all of them have to come together and try to see how they can take their innovations way beyond academics. So again, in academics, we have innovation, but we academicians are not really very well versed in terms of productization. So that's why we have technology innovation centers, incubation center, innovation centers coming up in all hospitals, as well as in education system. So thanks to AICTE, UGC, and many other supreme bodies of education, they are trying to bring this kind of compliance with respect to developing an innovation center or incubation center at universities and engineering colleges, is even in medical colleges. So the last thing I want to touch up in few seconds is on regulatory compliance. Yes, regulatory compliance is very, very important. And when this was introduced previously, there was no such big hue and cry about regulatory compliance. But thanks to CDSCO, we have right now some of the compliance for, especially for us, that is biomedical engineers and innovators who are in this segment, healthcare segment. So now it is respected as well as it is complied, but soon it will evolve even more bigger than FD and CE. That's what my belief is. So let's see and move forward on how the entire community of healthcare and biomedical engineers take us forward. So over to Shiva.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abhishek. Now, why regulatory compliances is so critical or so crucial is because we talk about a drug to cure a disease or to take care of a problem, a pandemic, for instance. Now, this is possible only when the compliances are taken care. When we talk about compliances, these are the set of the standard rules or the guiding rules which are framed by the regulatory authorities. It could be the CDSCO in India, or the US FDA, or the EMEA of the Europe, or the ICH guidelines, or the WHO. These are the ones which actually give certain guidelines. Now, why these guidelines? Now, if we follow these guidelines, we'll be in a position to manufacture the products which are safe, which are efficacious, and which the customer will have confidence in, and we can have predictable results. So that is where the compliance becomes utmost important. Now, it also eliminates risks, the risk, and it also takes care of the otherwise high cost what one would incur in case of the product not meeting the regulatory standards. So whenever the product gets into the regulatory issues due to the quality aspects, the cost of correcting this problem is going to be humongous. I think by being in system, by complying the requirements, I think the costs are going to be much lesser. And more than the cost, here we talk about the safety aspects, which are going to be more predictable. I go further to some of the agencies which are involved in this regulatory matters. It could be the CDSCO in India. The Drugs and Cosmetic Act 1940 continues to form the basis of the regulatory compliances in India. The Schedule M, which specifies the requirement for factory premise, how the factory has to be, what are the requirements to have a pharmaceutical factory. So these things are covered in Schedule M. And Schedule T also talks about the Siddha, Unani, and the other allied sciences which are also in prevalence. Now, apart from the manufacturing, we talk about the Pharmacy Act of 1948, which strictly gives the guidelines that how a pharmacy should be run, how the dispensing has to be done. So I think the compliances has no limit actually. Now, starting from innovation, which starts with the drug discovery, the compliances come into play. Now, if I have to take the drug development, the new drug development, we can probably talk about compliances at various stages. It could be in terms of the basic research. One has to comply with the basic research guidelines. Then it would be the preclinical, which is done on the animal testing. Then it would be the IND, which is the investigational new drug. Then it would be the clinical trials, which is phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and the post marketing surveillances. So compliances goes all across the life cycle of the product, life cycle of the drug, right from its research stage to the PMS, that's the post marketing, which will be after the launch of the product. Compliances would all about be adhering to the set of the rules which have been prescribed by the regulatory bodies. I think if the compliances are taken care, the product will be not only safe, it is risk free. With this, probably I would open up the panel discussion for more interactions. Thank you so much, and I welcome Dr. Amin probably to throw some light on this.
Yes, exactly. When we are thinking of innovations, of certifications, we forget our own soil, like CIDISCO, and also a pre-medical certificate or pre-compliance certificate. So before anything and everything, every innovation, I stress on the intellectual property rights of the innovator and the team. So intellectual property rights, right from the innovation, like in the academics, a student comes up with the innovation and we need to store the innovation for that student. This is where we can promote. Now we are thinking about research. We have enough of funds. There is no shortage of funds anywhere in the world, whether it is India or anything. But the only question is, how do you get the funds for the right product at the right time? That is one of the important tool where we all have to come together. Innovations like a PhD in innovations and research and regulatory compliance. A consortium, again I stress, a consortium between technology, healthcare, academics, and policymakers. When you create an idea, you need to make an idea, then somebody have to use it, like utility intellectual property right. You make a tool. For example, you have an iPhone, you have a Samsung, but how you use that phone, how are you using it? That's an utility intellectual property right. For example, if you say how Dr. Abhishek was saying that you ask the doctor, what are your shortfalls? They will immediately say the parking shortfall. They will not say that, okay, look, I have to hang my stat in my neck. Is it something like we will have a use and throw stat or something like that? That is a shortfall. For example, when my son was small, I used to carry my stat with me for the pediatrician because I did not wanted the pediatrician who is using the stat for the other child to be used. The thing, when you are charging so much, you are charging 1,000 rupees for a consultation with a pediatrician. A stat for a baby is just 150 to 200 rupees, even today, a simple one. This is a shortfall. So how do you use it? The utility benefit, the utility innovation, the regulatory compliance also, like Dr. Shiva and Dr. Kaushik, you have been in Europe. Even the utility, how do you use it? You cannot take photographs of the shops where they have put on the decorations, right? So this is how the utility benefits, the regulatory compliance. If we combine all that, it will be a team of minimum of 4 members in each team. And the team can get an intellectual property. The team can get an innovation patency. The team becomes an innovation. So if we can come together with all these compliances, and how can an innovation be from the innovator can be in India, innovator can be an Indian, anywhere innovator can be a foreigner, but how do we secure the innovation? Dr. Abhishek, see, when the children are small, he stole my craft or he stole my thing and he stole my idea, that was different. But as they grow up, the security of innovating, they are afraid to show the innovation because it is copied. Immediately copy paste. You see most of the articles, plagiarism. I wanted Dr. Sunil also to join, maybe next thing. The plagiarism issue is huge, which we don't understand in India. The word itself, they don't understand. TRIPS, again, the concept of Dr. Shiva would know what is TRIPS, but to bring TRIPS, to bring the innovation, to bring plagiarism all together, we need to do a training. We have to train from the beginning. So I think this would be like not taking much of the time. Again, I stress on intellectual property rights, innovation to avoid plagiarism. So we can start the panel discussion. Maybe this would go on for another 3 months or something like that. But probably this would be the thing again. Now, every time whenever I go to a technical session, they only ask me, "Ma'am, you're the only lady in everything. Why the ladies are not coming with the innovations? Why we don't see many women in the innovations?" Again, there is a gender disparity there. 1:100 or 1:10. Yes, they do innovate. They do have a creativity. When they can create so many dishes and recipes, they also do the creativity in that. But again, they are afraid to come out to speak. They have all the kinds. That word, they call that jugaad. I was like crazy. What is this? If when they're frying something, they cannot immediately. They will bend. They will fold it. They will use it. So that is an innovation what they tried. That also becomes the same thing comes even in the nurses. The nurses are the superb innovators. They will not wait for whatever the instruments they get, they immediately, if the ECG print ink is not there, they will take it out, they will take a syringe, they will put the distilled water in the ink, shake it and put it back. See, they are innovating at the time of the need. They are acting at the time of the. These are also innovations. It's not like we innovate a galaxy, we are discovering a galaxy. The small innovations also do matter. So probably I would like Tech Bharat to take up maybe a separate wing of women innovators to promote more women innovation. Again, I'm coming with my gender flag everywhere I go. So probably we can promote that. Cosmetics, not only cosmetics, they are super innovators even in automobile industry. They are driving their car, they cannot put a brake, they will take the something and they will tie there and they will make an innovation there. So this is how we can all combine together again: intellectual
Yep.
property rights, plagiarism issue, and utility benefits. These are the 3 points which I would prefer. Yeah, thank you so much. I think we can start with the questions because we run with
Yeah.
the time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amin. I think let's move on to some of the questions that have been posed to the panel here. Is there any research on how people react towards different healthcare systems? Is part one. And part two is also, what are the parameters that help in deciding the patient's mindset towards different healthcare systems? I think it's a very, very interesting question because we are in a country with so many systems. It could be allopathic, Siddha, Unani, homeopathic, and so many which are probably also called as Gaunti and so on. So I would like probably Dr. Kaushik to throw some light on this to begin with.
Sure. Yeah, it is a very overarching question for sure. I think there is an element of faith in everything that does not exclude medicine either. So one of the early surgeons in the field of medicine, who wrote a book called Man the Unknown, says the same thing. How near Paris they could find a pond like we have in India, where people would go just outside Paris. People would go and take a bath and they would get cured of their diseases. So there is always a response because we always have a conditioning of our system. And even now in clinical trials, I'm not an expert, but you do see the use of placebo, so to get certain kind of information. So the response that people have for a healthcare system, like you asked, is extremely, extremely important. And that has also come out in the recent studies. I also happened to read a couple of them. And one also from Deloitte very recently said that the focus has now shifted. The response or the epicenter of response of a person to a healthcare system has now come to value. Now, it's a very interesting word. We thought value was in toothpaste, was in shampoo, was in car, was in phone, was in computer. But now suddenly value has come to medicine and healthcare. So what does it mean? If you look at, maybe on the lighter side, if you look at, I always use it in my innovation workshop, you get a spine surgery done, you will get 50% discount for knee surgery. I mean, that is not value, right? That is something that's on the extreme side of pushing something. I mean, I see doctor is laughing, but it's true. I get messages like that, and I put it on my WhatsApp saying, guys, what's happening? why should my wife get an operation because it's on sale? So the value has come perhaps there is an overcorrection of value. So what is value now is people look at different things. There is a cost of medicine. In many countries like US, India, cost of medicine can be anywhere between 10 to 20% of the whole solution, which is significant. So the value of medicine is how well it solves a problem. So if it's a front-loaded thing, so if you look at what happens in the back end, a pharmaceutical company comes up with a new drug for boosting hemoglobin, right? So people who have a low HG can have this issue. And my father also happened to have, and hematologist would recommend you a very expensive injection. Probably in Indian rupees, it's like 35,000 bucks or $500. And then you take that medicine once in 3 weeks or 4 weeks. And if it does not very reasonably solve the problem, people don't find that valuable. So the value is not just cost, it's what you get in return. It has come to that for sure. Now, because of these niche problems, somebody having a low RBC in their bone marrow as a source and a very specific medicine for that, solution for that, the cost is, distributed within a very smaller number of people than compared to a paracetamol, right? So that increases the cost of the medicine, but the value is not diminished. It's a life-threatening situation, right? And people would like to have a solution for that, even if it's expensive. And that brings us to the other side of the value chain. Is it what can I do to prevent it? So preventive healthcare is also expensive. I mean, if you take a good massage, because my physio always says that you should have once in at least 3 weeks, if not 4 weeks. So that's not a very a simple thing, but it is twice like doctor said, 1,000 rupee consultation, a massage would be 2,000 bucks. So it's double. So do people think valuable? Not all. Not all think that prevention is the better way to find value in solution. So I think people respond differently, either if they have experienced something significant or they have seen something happening to somebody close to them who has experienced something very significant. Their response is very different than somebody in their 30s and 40s who is yet to even have any significant setback in their health issue. I think mindset, to summarize, is not just about healthcare, it's about the value that they feel and the value that it can give, I think. And if I see the COVID, I only see an increase in two things: new people or people cooking new things, or people coming up with all sorts of home-based medicine for their face, their nails, and their hair. And you can see thousands of them, if not hundreds of them. That would be my take on this, Mr. Shiva.
Yeah. Dr. Amin, would you like to add something on the different healthcare systems?
I mean, like how Dr. Kaushik was saying, I was literally laughing like packages, by when. When you say about preventive healthcare, I have always been debating on, we carry a set of genes when we are born. We cannot change the genes, but we can stop that into mutation. It is just simple to do a whole genome sequencing once in your lifetime, have a compendium, and know what your genes need. We had that when we were small. The mother knew that the elder son can eat brinjal, the younger one cannot eat. So she knew it because she was very close. Now, this one whole genome sequencing once in a lifetime. It's like a compendium. You know what your genes is, what are the gene mutations you will have. Then you go, okay, after 15 years, if you don't follow this, then you will have it. As I'm a gene therapist as well, I'm consulting. I asked this girl, okay, from tomorrow you're supposed to stop eating shrimps and start taking mushrooms. She says, Auntie, I hate mushrooms, because she's not taking all her life. She's not taking onion all her life because she doesn't like it. But her genes are adaptive for certain things and they have not taken. Now, like Dr. Kaushik is saying, buy one, get one free, or the costliest part is the preventive healthcare. The one thing is, aane ke baad dekhenge. When it comes, let us see. That is one easy thing what we are taking. Now, the innovator is failing in the technology side, whether it is genetic analysis, whether it is mechanics, whether it is tools, even a simple stethoscope. The innovator is not able to bring that both gap together face to face. Why do you need to carry your own steth? What is happening? I was like uncomfortable seeing some doctors in India. They put on the stat right from the house they leave. They're driving the car, they get down, they go out. Just they need to have this stat around the neck for this. And I saw a board. He has trained from Germany. I was very much confused when I went there. I asked this person, very leading person in Bangalore, a doctor, you're trained in Germany and you're carrying the step from the car. And he said, yeah, I was there for 15 weeks as an observer. But that becomes trained and his consultation doubles. Then I said, as an observer, were you allowed to use a stet in Germany? No, 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 we are not supposed to use a stet in Germany. Only we have a stet, 2 boxes, we take one and we clean one and then we put back. Why not in India? Right? Dr. Shiva and Dr. Kaushik, all of us, we are speaking about regulatory compliance. Why can't we create this regulatory compliance? Waiting for a vaccine is no answer. What we have, why don't we think of what we have? So yes, we need, again, I think that would be my take on this, that how do we bring forward the technology and the healthcare assistant together? Yes, Dr. Shiva, I think I will go on. If I go on, maybe I'll go on.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think it was probably indeed a very comprehensive discussion we had here on this topic. Now, can you move on to the next question? Now, your thoughts on public-private partnership, that's a PPP, to improve quality in healthcare services. Probably this is again it can be an addition to what we have been discussing now.
Yeah.
Dr. Abhishek, would you like to take on this?
Yeah, sure. So PPP model has a lot of success stories. So to simply correlate, all of us keep traveling on air. On air, and we have seen many airports, including one which I've frequently gone is through Bangalore Airport, and that's again PPP model. So that's been so successful. So even healthcare system, if we completely privatize, then there is a stigma, or it may be reality also, that if it is completely private, then it will be charged like as soon as you go, they'll be charging very high. And unfortunately, insurance is not mandatory, though insurance is mandatory for a vehicle, but not mandatory for a human in India. That's really sad state, but that's how the policy is here in India. So if you want something of PPP, that's we could definitely try it for even healthcare system. We have seen completely government as well as completely private, but not in PPP model. That's something we should come up in healthcare system. And otherwise also in not just hospitals, even in terms of innovations, which a company does. So if I do an innovation here, but it will again finally end up either going to Europe or US, they will actually convert into a really product, use all the compliance what they have for FDA or CE, and then launch the same thing there and sell it back to us. So that has to be stopped. That can happen if there is a strong support from industry to academia, as well as the policy makers, also government. So PPP model will definitely work in such kind of scenarios.
Dr. Kaushik, would you like to add something on this?
So I think the PPP model, I fully agree to what Abhishek said. I think there is only one key pillar for any PPP to work, whether it's a metro project, whether it's a healthcare project. I think fixing accountability is the cornerstone for any partnership to work. And I think the systems are very well understood the moment it is out. There are people who are studying the systems and laws, etc. I think that is the essence of any PPP, especially in healthcare, to work. For example, today, if you take a simple treatment across 5 hospitals in 5 different cities, I'm pretty sure nobody can tell you what it would be to get the treatment in terms of cost. So, for example, what would be the medicine cost? I mean, if I take a hypertensive medicine and I go to a medical shop on an average street in India, in Bangalore at least, he will give me a price. And if I say, hey, this is this kind of medicine, don't you have discount? He said, okay, you give me 10% less. And I say, I'm a member, okay, you give me 20% less. So I think there is this band which they operate with. And even the medicine I was talking about earlier, which costed 35K, a friend of mine got it for 1/3 of the cost, right? So What I'm basically pointing is for PPP to work, I think, for example, California has brought a law which says you have to be transparent with your pricing. If you increase your price, it's fine, but just let everybody know that there's an increase in price of your medicine and by this much. So everybody's prepared for it. I think PPP is actually needed. I don't think we can go around it. We have to go through it, but we have to find ways to make it work.
I think transparency is the key word here, the key take home. If the PPP model has to become successful. With that, we go on to the next one. That in the backdrop of the pandemic, we have witnessed lack of preparedness to manage the emergencies, the health crisis due to pandemic. Is a reformation of healthcare system across the world imminent? Do you think it's going to be a possibility very soon?
I think we need to have it as a team. Again, like what I'm stressing, the same thing. We are we prepared for the next pandemic is the question everybody is asking. We haven't finished with the present pandemic. Are we prepared with the next pandemic? We had H1N1, we had Ebola, we had SARS, we had MERS, but still we were not prepared for the COVID-19. So for the next pandemic, like PPP model, we should be prepared with a combination of technology and healthcare assistance. So are we prepared for the post-pandemic era? Before the next pandemic, are we prepared for the post-pandemic era? What is in the post-pandemic era? What are the tools we have to take? What are the modules we have to prepare? Because when there is a flood, after the floods, there is absolute silence. Everything is washed out. And after pandemic also, there is a lot of trauma, both physical and the mental trauma and economic trauma. Are we prepared for that? Like the transparency in the costing, whether it is a cost of the treatment, cost of the healthcare, cost of the pharmacy, cost of the medical technology. So my question is, are we prepared for the post-pandemic situation before preparing for the next pandemic? Right? So we are creating a vaccine for the present pandemic. But what about the side effects of the vaccine in the post-pandemic? What about the side effects of the pandemic, both in the way of economy, in the way of the healthcare, in the way of education? Now everybody is getting used to online. A child of 5 years and 6 years has not seen the school. He's only seeing the screen time. Right? Are we prepared for the post-pandemic? My question would be here. Should we prepare for the post-pandemic to have a better quality of life? And is invasive treatments, invasive therapies, surgeries are the only answer? That is, or are we, that is one of the question I'm asking, can we not bring non-invasive therapies? Yes, we need drugs, we need emergency drugs. Can we not bring non-drug therapies? Whatever we have, the whole system in India, like Ayurveda, Unani, Siddha, Yoga, but can we not compile it instead of the political fight within themselves into a non-drug therapy, diet, lifestyle changes, quality of life? Everybody wants to have a quality of life. Quality of life is not only car, not only a good house, not only flight. Pandemic taught us that even you have the best car, you couldn't go out. Even you could go by a business class flight, you couldn't go out. The quality of life is how you're living. Are you sleeping for 8 hours? What are the reasons for not sleeping for 8 hours? Are you having your food? Is your digestion proper? Are you able to concentrate? Are you able to communicate? This is quality of life. So can we think on quality of life in post-pandemic? Are we prepared for a better quality of life or a good quality of life in the post-pandemic, which will lead to the preparedness of the next pandemic? I think I'm just putting up the line properly. Should we prepare for a good quality of life, whether it is pandemic, non-pandemic? Are we prepared to live a quality of life? It's not like eating too much, or it's eating right at the right time, what to eat, when to eat, how to eat, and why to eat. Even this. Also, what goes in also has to come out. Even the excretion process also to be monitored. So can we think on quality of life post-pandemic and next pandemic? So that would be my concept throw on this. I think that would be possible.
Yeah, probably. I think there is a reset button which has been activated now. It's a reset. It's a reset. So we go back to the traditional way of life, probably the lifestyle, the food habits, the nutrition, going with cold pressed oils or going with unpolished rice, as edible. I think this is a reset. I think this has to happen once in a century. I think we are going through that phase now. The last pandemic was about 100 years before. I think this is where we are. Dr. Kaushik.
Yeah, I see it slightly differently maybe, but let me give you an example. See, when you build a system which is suppose for 5 people in a house, you have a different kind of system. You can have a case-by-case system. When you're building it for 100 million people, a billion people, you need a very different system. What is that? What I'm trying to arrive at is, when you design systems, like my background is also in systems and engineering, because systems are systems anywhere, whatever may be the system, you design for the norm. Okay, what is the normal? If you take a Gaussian distribution, what is the normal that you call in the distribution? You don't design systems for behaving optimally for exceptions. In the test case and compliance, as you all know, it's called the corner cases. You still handle it, but you don't design to be optimal in corner case also, because there is no such system which is optimal for the entire distribution. So when I say healthcare, whether it needs reformation, of course, if it is going from the tune, for example, I am told that in Karnataka or in India, the Nursing Home Act is from the 1950s. Perhaps nobody knows what a nursing home looked like in the 1950s, even in this panel, right? So I don't know what laws we are trying to talk about. Of course, it needs a reformation, but we should not have a knee-jerk reaction. Wall Street corrected itself because of the financial crisis that happened there, how people looted the system. So they fixed the system. So any system gets correction, and sometimes there are big corrections like this, sometimes there are smaller. So basically my point is, we should still not forget the normal healthcare needs compared to an epidemic or a pandemic.
Wonderful. Dr. Abhishek, your take on this?
Yeah, so one thing I want to tell is that unless we experience it, people don't like to do anything. For example, it's very clearly written that smoking is injurious to health, and everywhere in television or anything you see, there is a caution saying don't smoke, don't drink, and things like that. But still, people do it. So more on what we are trying to see is it's unless we experience it, we can't do anything. But still, there is a lot of caution. There is a lot of things which has popped up. But on contrary, we have things where things are going in opposite way also. There are a lot of positive things which are happening during COVID. So let's take positive, but yeah, many of us, including me and all of us present here, are fed up of all this systems which is going on COVID, and we want things back. We were not prepared, yes, but maybe as Dr. Ether also said, that post-pandemic era is something which is very, very important for us to manage. My PhD was on mental health and neurosciences, so that was something very important topic which I want to use during this post-pandemic sessions. And there are many such things which has to be managed very well, even after pandemic, during pandemic. And this won't go off. So social distancing may not go off, mass gathering may not go off. And Sudhindra also says this very often. So if you see before COVID, Ola, Share, Uber Pool were making a lot of money. But now Share Pool and all, it's gone. The concept itself is gone. I don't know how many years it will again come back. Resource management, that was very positive at that time at that point of time. I was using Ola, Share, Uber, Pool, and all those things before pandemic. But now, if you see, I have stopped using Uber or Ola. I just drive my own car, in spite of having horrible traffic. So, what was good at that time, now it's completely bad. And we used to say network, and we used to say the generation Z, that you don't network, you network only on social networking sites. But now that itself is a new normal. So things are changing. I'm sure there is a lot of destruction which has happened. There's a lot of irreparable losses, but there is also many advantage also after this pandemic session.
Thanks so much, Dr. Abhishek. Let's move on to the next question, which is how to create an ecosystem where industry, academia, and government can work together to propel innovation in the healthcare. Dr. Amin?
Yes, we need to involve the universities right from the schools, technology partners, policymakers. Don't leave the policymakers from the government sector. They have to be there. Because once they understand, then it is easy for us to move forward. The policymakers, universities, academicians, and the hospital heads. When you go to a hospital, there is an administrative head and there is a technical head. You need both of them here. You need the administrative head to understand what the technical head, and there will be an administration for technical, there will be administration, the director for administration, director for technical, and then there will be a chief medical officer. And all the three will have three different channels and three different egos. So here, bridging all of them together where the healthcare assistant is squeezed. If you take a technology, you go first to the doctor, but the doctor will not be able to take it because the administrative director has to approve the budget for it. So we have to see how we have to bring all the three of them together. It is very rare you see an IAS officer who is a doctor. It's very rare. So Karnataka has a health minister who is a doctor himself, but again, you see the combination of this policymakers, administration, and the technical person. In Germany, everybody said Germany did well because the Mrs. Angelina Merkel was herself a chemist PhD. So she opened the doors for the labs because she knew what was needed. So she opened. Most of them here are in the same field where they have their PhDs or doctorates. But in India, what will happen? A person who will be sitting and in the technical side, in the administrative side, will not understand. If he says brinjal, he will say eggplant, but both of them are the same. But they both have the two different names, but both of them will be saying the same. So somebody has to bell the cat and say that, yes, both of you are on the same page, both of you are saying the same thing. So this is where the combination is needed. I think Dr. Kaushik got what I was explaining to him, exactly how to promote the innovation or to do anything. We need the combination of this together. When you have done a PhD in innovation, first of all, they will ask, do you really need a PhD for an innovation would be the question. You do PhD in physics, you do PhD in chemistry, you do PhD. I have done my public health PhD. For they said, oh, you want to clean the toilets and that is public health. Now public health has become the topmost topic. Since 21st of January till now, I've been banging on my head for the COVID and I've got 2 certificates now. Postgraduate diploma in COVID-19 and postgraduate diploma in SARS-2. 2 certificates from China University. They are appreciating and giving me an award, not the memento or the certificate. They're giving me some money to do it. So Nobel Prize is the money you get to do the project. It's not a prize. I used to think, what is going on? We need to announce some prizes from Tech Bharat saying this is an award. You get 50,000 Indian rupees or you get 5 lakh Indian rupees to innovate. This is an award. Award means not a garland or something like that. You are getting an award for an appreciation to do the project. So you are getting an award to further do the project and publish it. This is where we have to think now. I think all of us have to bring in a kind of an award from this panel discussion that we open an award for young minds to innovate, and also we open an award for the regulatory compliance people who are in the public sector. We say, okay, we give you an award, we give you certain money to do the research work in the regulations. For example, somebody is coming to you to do the medical device certificate. Do a PhD in this itself. You're dealing with this every day. Why don't you publish this as your PhD? Probably in that way, we can cultivate the research module among the regulatory compliance people in the healthcare industry, in the education industry. So this is what I can suggest of.
I think wonderful, Dr. Amin. It was It was very interesting. Now, just let me add here my viewpoints. Um, when I did my pharmacy, bachelor of pharmacy, we used to have about 52 subjects. 52 subjects included subjects like, engineering, drawing, chemical engineering, and then it was accountancy, then it was the management subject, and so on, and then plethora of pharmaceutical sciences. At that point of time, we were bit confused that what are we doing here? Am I going to become a civil engineer, and so on. However, when I set up my own industry, I started appreciating what these 52 subjects were really for. Unfortunately, the content was there. In terms of the context, it was very appropriate, but there was a disconnect between what we studied in theory and where it needs to be applied. So I realized it only when I set up my industry, when I had to go onto the drawing board. Though I was not a CAD specialist, but even then I could understand a bit of it and started appreciating what they actually made an attempt. Now, today, I think that is where the disconnect is. Academia probably felt that it was needed and they were right, but then they failed to bridge it where it was needed. However, my son now is again doing pharmacy. Now, that's probably the second generation now. My wife is a pharmacist, I am a pharmacist, and we all have done MBAs, and my son will also probably do pharmacy and an MBA. Now, this time, instead of the government college, I put him to a private university in Mysore. Now, when they got to know that I was from the pharmaceutical background, they asked me that, what are the reforms that we can do? What are the curriculum that we can introduce so that it can help the industry? It was a pleasant surprise for me. I think the academia is now gearing up. We're gearing up to deliver what is needed. Now, don't know how much the government will come in. Yes, the UGC Commission and so on, I think they are also active. So things have started happening of late. The last 4 or 5 years, I think we are seeing a lot of interaction between the government, the academia, and the industry. I think this is a welcome step, but however, there's a long way to go. And I think more and more interactions have to be organized between the academia, because that is where the formative years are spent. Whatever I am today, it is because of my probably the education where it was given to me. But however, what was missing during those days, we're talking about 30 years before, it was more theory. Probably we got gold medal, we got the excellence medal, but everything revolved only around the academia, only academic. So I think today it is changing, and it is changing for good. Would you like to add something, Dr. Abhishek?
Yeah, I totally, completely agree with whatever you said. Even in the university or the college where I work, we are doing entire transformation of engineering education. We were the first one to start practicing outcome-based education. And more importantly, we have all stakeholders involved while we are framing the curriculum, and even our academic council members are a different kind of partners. So each department has industry partners, they have their alumni, because many a times the alumni come back and say, this is something very important which was not taught, but it would have been good if you can add that in syllabus. And some of the parents who have some kind of experience in the field, they come and give us suggestions. So we have a committee who actually come and help us out with all the entire things from end to end about the syllabus, how we should train, and how we are supposed to do and all. One of the initiatives which I did was the medical device development course. First couple of years, I invited industry experts who were very comfortable with the entire regulation, the regulatory compliance, as well as unmet need analysis, the Stanford biodesign process. And it was throughout the semester they took the classes, and I was like a student sitting in their class, understanding it. And after 2 years, from the third year onwards, I took over the entire class and I started teaching it. But nevertheless, I am inviting at least a couple of sessions handled by industry experts so that they get the first-hand information rather than me passing on. So this kind of initiatives are happening all over India. That's very good, welcoming boom by all the engineering as well as medical colleges. And more importantly, one more transformation which I feel is very important is doctors. They have been taught one of the workshops which we usually do on unmet need analysis and finding the problem and all. It's very hard to get the time of doctors, so we invite the doctors to come at least for a couple of days in the 1 week workshop to come and spend time with the engineering and management students to understand how they can do and what kind of problem. And after that, the rest of the days they try to interact with the with the medicos and try to understand that this is something they have to solve. And the last thing I want to tell you is the policy change or the transformation which will happen is in the syllabus of even in the medical education. They should have some of the components of regulatory compliance also. Why is that? Is because it's not just that we engineers and the people in public health and or regulatory compliance, we should scratch our head. So even doctors, because it's many a times tough for us to convince the doctors. Let's take the same example of stethoscope or even sphygmomanometer. So if I want to use sphygmomanometer and it's the same traditional one which was used ages ago, we are just squeezing and then finding out what's the BP. But if even though we have the sphygmomanometer which is digital, still we are not actually trying to use that. The doctors are not really very easily accepting. So this is one of the field where there is maximum resistance, but also maximum changes can happen in this field.
Wonderful. I think we have had a detailed discussion, I suppose. Now, let's move on to the next question quickly because we have taken nearly 70 minutes now. I think it's been very interesting though. Now, India is largely underserved in terms of coverage of health insurance. I'm sure everyone agrees about it. Now, what steps should the government take, according to you, in bringing the population under health insurance? May not be very much applicable to the developed first world, but here, yes, we are a progressive country.
Insurance is a must in India. I mean, what can I say? Here, see, 16% of what you earn in Germany has to be gone for the health insurance, whether you take it or not. That's why people don't pay privately in Germany. But in India, people are paying privately. There is an advantage of insurance and also a disadvantage, because when they pay the insurance, they want to cover by the insurance. So they will say, when we are already paying for the insurance, why should we pay privately? Right? See, insurance in India is a must because like per month, 20% we are supposed to spend for our healthcare, just like how you are spending 20% of your earning for the rent, water, electricity. Why not keep the 20% for your healthcare? The people have to understand before they get into the insurance thing. I think Dr. Kaushik, you would be the best person to answer this question on the insurance.
No, I think I agree. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a standard disclaimer on insurance. It's a matter of solicitation, right? But having said that, that's the tagline. But see, I think when you're talking in the context of a healthcare system, there has been rapid strides in like Shiva said, in India as well, in terms of public insurance, the government schemes for below a certain economic thing. I think that's really a wonderful thing, and people are actually using it in equally serving private hospitals. So the resistance is actually from the private guys not to let them in, right? So like many things, the stonewall. Many of the healthcare industry professionals stonewall many changes that are actually exposed to. But having said that, Constitution Article 21 of India proclaims clearly the right to health. right? So that means that's not a discussion point of if we should do it, it's a discussion point of how to do it. I think many people have to take a piece of the responsibility here. Like I said, though we have made rapid strides, there is also medicines available in Janaushad where you get it the same generics for a literally a fraction of a price, and that's hated by the multinational companies because they're not able to digest the fact that their the money is not where they thought it would be, though it's in the trillions of dollars in the end. So I think this is where I think a lot of companies. On the other extreme, if I have to take I mean, this is a real example. My cousin had to take a scan of her back, and she was writhing with pain, literally on the floor in California. But the first appointment she got was 7 months later. I mean, that's unthinkable. Whatever may be the system of insurance or etc., the timely intervention is what matters. And she's a contributing person in the United States who is earning every day. So you're crippling, from a capitalistic point of view, you are crippling a person who is generating revenue. So I think insurance on the whole should work in tandem with maybe a kind of a not severe kind of a situation, but a more a moderate kind of a situation. I think that coupling has to come, but cover should be there for everyone in whatever way you look at it.
Wonderful. I think we have covered most of the questions thrown at us. If Dr. Abhishek would like to add something as if something
no,
has
nothing
been,
much. Both the co-panelists have covered. But only thing, as I said, I want to repeat that here in India, insurance is kind of mandatory. But one thing I'm just assuming that why it is not mandatory, because it's not as expensive as Western countries or European countries. So it's also its medical tourism is very famous. So you get medical visa very faster in India, and there are many adjacent countries which come here to India to get treatment or what kind of surgery. And of course, there are many initiatives by many of the NGOs and private organizations where they park some of their money to treat underserved people. So these things are good, but yeah, still there is a lot of improvement which is required in terms of insurance policies. And one way the insurance agencies or insurance providers are not going in loss or anything. In spite of not having so many customers in India, they are still on profit side. So that's one of the insights which our audience will have.
Yeah, just to add here, I think most of the middle class in India has taken up the private insurance coverage, so which is a very, very positive one. Though it is not compulsory, but people have realized how important the insurance is. And compared to any of the Western economies, the cost of insurance, the premium, is actually pittance. It's nothing actually. It's nothing. So which is I think the private people also have realized that it's the volumes that can make a big difference. So we see so many insurance companies offering very, very competitive premiums. So that is, I think we are in the right direction when it comes to the country's population getting into the insurance mode. However, the concern is only when it comes to the bottom of the pyramid. Are the people living in the rural areas are adequately insured? The answer is absolutely no, though there are government, private, the primary hospitals, the health centers, but these are not adequately equipped. So I think that is probably we should see in the coming years, the private insurance companies also making inroads into the rural market. So we are catching up with the US and other countries actually in terms of the insurance for the larger masses now. So with this, I think we have spent a good amount of time on aspects related to the innovation, the healthcare aspects, and the compliances. Probably the next section, what is going to be, more topics can be covered in that. I would like to thank the Tech Bharati, the Health Tech, our gratitude for giving us an opportunity to to have this discussion. And over to Mr. Vishu now.
Thank you, Mr. Shiva. I think it was a very interesting discussion that we had, and I think one key takeaway that I can see is that industry and academia in the country should come together, collaborate, and with the able support of the government, create an ecosystem that can foster innovation and research in the country. Thank you, eminent panelists, for taking time out. And on behalf of the entire team at Tech Bharat, wholehearted gratitude for being part of this discussion. And I'm sure everybody will have the audience will have some key takeaways that they can take back and the ideas from this session. We thank you and we wish you the very best. Thank you so much. Have a nice day. Good day, sir.
Thank you so
Good
much.
day, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's evening, so you can all. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you, sir.